Some anonymous NFL executives comment on the Buccaneers' first-round selection of Graham Barton. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Thursday episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media, covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of this show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, and one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Some interesting takes coming in about the Bucs, and Baker Mayfield's chip on his shoulder just got a little bit bigger, but we're going to talk about that coming up later. Let's start things off with something that Mike Sando of The Athletic wrote up, and Mike Sando had a piece where he asked team executives around the league what they thought about certain decisions made during the NFL draft. And no, we're not going to get into any of the reaction about the Falcons' questionable decision to pay Kirk Cousins $1 billion and then turn around and draft Michael Penix. Instead, we're going to talk about two executives that commented on the Buccaneers' selection of Graham Barton at pick 26 in the first round, something you all know that I was a fan of them doing. Most of you watching live or listening later on were fans of that move as well. But under the cloak of anonymity, these executives were able to speak pretty freely about the decision. And the first executive said, quote, "If Graham Barton is going to be a starting center for 10 to 12 years, how can you not do it? Was Frank Ragnow a bad pick for the Lions?" End quote. The second executive said, quote, "Barton is a really nice high floor player. They've done a nice job building that offensive line," end quote. So let's start with the first comment and referencing Frank Ragnow. Now, let's not kid ourselves. Drafting a center isn't exciting or sexy. It's not going to sell jerseys at the team store or online. I even had my dad text me the Friday morning following the draft and say how bad he felt for me having to stay up so late and talk about the Bucs drafting a center. However, as I told my dad, and as I've said on this show, it was the right move for this Buccaneers team. And for those of you that follow the team closely and you're concerned with the overall success of the Buccaneers as a franchise, rather than who you get to use in Madden or who's going to make a cool jersey that you get to wear the first home game to Ray J, you know what a steal Barton was at 26 and what a pivotal piece he could play in the success of the team overall. His play directly ties into the success of Baker Mayfield, which ties directly into the success of Mike Evans and Cade Otton and Chris Godwin, etc. The same can be said for Barton and how it relates to the success of Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, and Chase Edmonds. The Bucs drafted an anchor for the middle of that line and are expecting him to set the tone for the interior protection and run blocking, something that was painfully absent last season. And no, of course, he can't do it on his own, but the addition of Barton in and of itself was crucial to the overall improvement of the offensive line. I want to rewind the clock just a little bit to the week leading up to the draft. And I talked on this show about first round picks, quote unquote, hitting and missing, according to the data that was put together, charting the first round of drafts from the year 2000 to the year 2019. The selection of center hit over 90% of the time. That's an overwhelming percentage compared to other positions, which didn't even get out of the 50s when you're talking about second place and beyond. In fact, the top three quote unquote safest positions and the ones that ranked above all else in hit rate were center and then guard and then offensive tackle. The entire offensive line beat out every other position in terms of hit rate. Those were the top three most successful positions drafted in the first round over the course of 20 years. So when you can spend draft capital like the Bucs did and get potentially your center for the next decade plus, knowing that he will at the very least be an upgrade over what you had, and at most a perennial Pro Bowler and All Pro, why wouldn't you do that? To the other executive's point, when he mentioned that the Bucs and Jason Light have done a good job building the offensive line, that tells you how other teams view this line compared to maybe the media or the fan base. We know there is a question at left guard. I talked about that on yesterday's show. But other teams around the league are obviously viewing this offensive line as a good one in how it was built and where it stands. That kind of goes back to draft speculation, right? We heard through the entire pre-draft process about Jackson Powers Johnson being a first-round talent. But there were also rumblings that the media was higher on him than teams were. He ended up falling to the second round. We didn't, for another example, we didn't think that there was any chance that cornerback TJ Tampa was going to fall to the Bucs in the second round. And instead, he fell all the way to day 3 because, again, the media was higher on him than teams were. GMs and scouts and coaches know what they are looking for in a player, and they have a better grasp on that than the media does. And I'm not saying that the media is clueless, of course, but when you hear things like this about a team compared to a narrative, it makes you take a step back and reevaluate what you might have missed the first time. The media saw certain things in these players that the teams didn't, and that's why every single year we have guys that are projected to go in the first round, projected to go early on day 2, fall all the way to round 3, or maybe a first rounder falls to the third round. We see it year after year after year, and that's okay because we see things a different way than the team does, but it's important to go back and look at why these guys might have fallen compared to where they were projected to go. Going to jump into the chat real quick. Demon Hunter in the chat says, James, your lightning helmet is too small, homie. Can't call the Stanley the most prestigious championship till it gets bigger. I haven't been able to find a full-size replica lightning helmet. If you come across one, send me the link. I would love to be able to add that, but that was the best that I could do. I'm wearing a lightning shirt if that helps you at all, but it doesn't matter how big or small my replica helmet is. The Stanley Cup is the best trophy in all of sports, and I will die on that hill. Richard in the chat just says, happy Thursday, Bucs fans. We got Sieg in the chat. Hi, all. So glad I can make a live cast. I'm usually listening at work, having to catch up. Sieg, welcome into the live chat. Welcome into the live show. Excited to have you here. Ryan Fowler of Bleacher Report apparently agrees with one of my takes, even though he probably doesn't actually know that. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest, big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. So today I want to say how I really feel about something. You might even be thinking about the same thing this week. I am wondering how these new rookies are going to fit in with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and whether or not Liam Cohen can take this offense to the next level, something the Bucs will desperately need with the schedule that they have this season if they want to make the playoffs for a fifth straight year. Now, most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, and it's important to get things off of your chest every once in a while. Therapy can be different for everyone, and being able to utilize therapy on your own time is incredibly beneficial, and that's what you get with BetterHelp. On top of that, it's entirely at home, it's entirely on your own time, and you can change therapists at any time for any reason, no questions asked. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible, suited to your schedule. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every single day. Everydayers, make sure you are coming back tomorrow. All things are still on track for a very special guest to be joining me, and I promise I will have that Chris Braswell film breakdown coming up. It's taking a little bit longer than I thought it was going to, having to dive in a little bit more just because of the snap counts that he saw last year. So, doing a deep dive on that. I will be bringing you my Braswell breakdown on Monday, but make sure you're coming back for a very special guest to talk about this Buccaneers draft class coming up tomorrow. In the meantime, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Bleacher Report dropped a fun column the other day, and I felt that it was worth mentioning, and it comes from Ryan Fowler, who did a piece on which undrafted free agent from every team has the best chance to make the roster. For those that didn't hear or see it, I dove into the Bucs undrafted free agents on offense and defense, breaking down which ones I thought had the best chance to make the team and the reasons for that. I did that back on May 2nd, so go back and check that out if you haven't already heard or seen it. But Fowler showed some love to one of the players that I mentioned and was in my top 2 of most likely undrafted free agents to make the team. Linebacker Kalen DeLoach out of Florida State. And Fowler said, quote, "Versatility remains king in today's NFL. While Kalen DeLoach could be classified as a tweener, thus muddying his initial projection, the Florida State standout has the instincts and coverage ability to wear multiple hats for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers head coach Todd Bowles. Last spring, Tampa Bay struck gold by adding hybrid corner safety Christian Izien post-draft. DeLoach would give Tampa another versatile skill set to roam at varying depths this fall," end quote. DeLoach was a guy that I mentioned had a legitimate shot because of his sideline-to-sideline speed as well as his textbook tackling ability. On top of that, the depth at inside linebacker is a bit shallow, and there's still no clear-cut replacement right now for Devin White. I, as well as many others, I'm sure a lot of you in the chat, expect KJ Britt to win that starting job opposite of Levante David, but you also have Servassier Dennis and JJ Russell there as well. And then DeLoach is a player that is going to compete for a roster spot from the jump. You essentially have 3 guys competing for a starting job. You have DeLoach in there competing to make the 53-man roster and be a depth piece, at least as an undrafted rookie. And he can really solidify his opportunity to make the roster if he can ingrain himself as a special teams standout. With the modified kickoff rules, DeLoach could use that sideline-to-sideline speed and sure tackling ability to limit opposing teams to minimal returns while shutting down running lanes for the return man. That in and of itself may make him valuable enough to keep around. On top of the injuries sustained by inside linebackers over the last few years, last season getting so bad that they even had to start Ryan Neal at linebacker at one point, having him on the roster will be insanely valuable. Beyond all of that, Todd Bowles will love a guy like him and the versatility that he brings to be able to line up at a couple of different positions, create mismatches, and disguise what Bowles truly wants to do. We know that Bowles loves players that are, as Fowler puts it, tweeners. You have Christian Izien. You can argue that third-round pick Tyke Smith out of Georgia is a tweener. He's listed as a safety, took the majority of his snaps as a slot corner, but he's a guy that can bounce all over the field. He lined up as outside corner. He lined up at free safety. He lined up at strong safety. He lined up in the box and played nickel corner. So, he could very well be considered a tweener. JTS, he isn't so much a tweener as he is the chess piece that Todd Bowles refers to as one of his chess pieces. So he's a guy that can be moved all over the field as well. Bowles is going to find different ways to use Delogue, but it'll be on Delogue to prove in camp that he can make it work, get the job done, and earn a spot on the 53-man roster. Of course, I still think that the most likely undrafted player to make the roster is going to be defensive lineman Judge Culpepper, given the depth there, given kind of the disappointment in Logan Hall, the heavy rotation that the Bucs are expected to use along the defensive line as well as at edge rusher, and the fact that the Buccaneers gave him $100,000 in guarantees as a priority undrafted free agent. That, to me, says that Culpepper is likely in the driver's seat of being able to make the 53-man roster, but Delogue could be a sneaky special addition to the roster. Going to jump into the chat again real quick before we hit the next break. We got Emily in the chat. It says, hi, everyone. Can't wait for the season to start. I've got high hopes. And Emily, I'll let you know, as well as everyone else watching right now, for those that have not heard, the NFL is expected to release the schedule next week. So we're going to know how things are going to shake out, how the Buccaneers roster looks, any tough stretches, extended road trips, extended home stays, things of that nature. We are going to know what the schedule will look like. And of course, preseason competition, where a lot of these battles are going to take place, at the slot corner position, at outside corner, at edge rusher, at left guard. We're going to see a lot of that play out in training camp, but it's vital for these players to get those preseason snaps and be able to prove it on the field against real, live snaps in a different team. So, I know preseason stats don't matter. Preseason wins and losses don't matter. But as you guys will know, as we get closer, I will tell you what to watch for in the preseason to really understand what the Bucs are looking for and how to actually enjoy preseason games when you're looking at a bunch of guys that are, second stringers or position battles, things like that. That the win or the loss doesn't matter, but the game itself does. We got G Vegas in the chat. Panthers have so many running backs on their roster. If Canales can't produce a run game this year with anybody, then we know what kind of head coach he will be. I'm still really interested to see how all of that is going to shake out with Dave Canales going to Carolina as the head coach. I said on this show, I didn't fault him for taking the job. There's only 32 of those. If you're going to get an opportunity, you better seize it because it may not come back around. But I also said that the Carolina Panthers job was the worst job that you could take as a first-time head coach because of the ownership and the issues there. So interested to see how Dave Canales does. Nothing new here, but Baker Mayfield continues to be disrespected as CBS gives him some bulletin board material. That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. You better believe that I'm keeping an eye on the Celtics and trying to plan a surprise trip for my youngest son to see them in action against the Cavs, or possibly the Indiana Pacers if they can get past the Knicks. And those last-minute deals from Game Time are the best way to make sure that we get in to see his favorite team. With Game Time's last-minute deals, I can save up to 60% off those playoff seats. And once I find where we'll be sitting, being able to use Apple Pay and have those tickets in just 2 clicks makes the process about as easy as you can get. No surprises either. With all-in pricing, I know exactly what I'll spend when I'm looking for where we're going to sit. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Wrapping things up here on a Thursday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And I got a question. When are people going to learn? I mean, you all remember last year. The Bucs were constantly in the conversation as being one of the worst teams in football, and they were going to be in the Caleb Williams sweepstakes, and the Saints were the clear favorites to win the division, and every odds maker had the Bucs projected to finish last in the division, if not dead last in the entire NFL. We all remember that, right? And we all remember that a lot of that had to do with people thinking that Tom Brady left, so the rest of the roster obviously had to be trash. And then people thinking that Baker Mayfield himself was trash and he was going to be lucky to lead the Bucs to 3 wins on the season. Well, and last year they win the division, they win a playoff game, they were actually pretty close to upsetting the Detroit Lions at home and going to the NFC Championship game. And, you know, people just never learn. The NFL on CBS released their quarterback power rankings, where, of course, Patrick Mahomes was first. All right, cool. No argument from me on that one. But then things go off the rails immediately after that. The rest of the top 10 in order were as follows: Brock Purdy, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, CJ Stroud, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert, and Jordan Love. Yikes. As for Baker Mayfield, he came in 20th, behind Kirk Cousins, behind Deshaun Watson, behind Geno Smith, behind Russell Wilson. What are we even doing at this point? First off, I like Brock Purdy, but calling him the second best quarterback in the NFL is absolutely insane. CJ Stroud in the top 5 above Lamar and Jalen Hurts. Let's calm down. He had a great rookie year. I have eaten more than my fair share of crow on his performance last year compared to what I thought was going to happen. And he looked great. But we're talking about a 2-time MVP and a quarterback that has played in a Super Bowl compared to a guy who played 1 year. Again, let's calm down. Jordan Love in the top 10. He was garbage for half the year last year. He didn't turn it on until Thanksgiving. Look, I'm not saying that Baker Mayfield should be in the top 10, but at the very least, he should be in the top 15. I am confident in saying that Baker Mayfield is without a doubt in the top half of the league in quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins is not impressive, and his track record speaks for itself. Trevor Lawrence was not good last year. Deshaun Watson has been completely useless since he was traded to the Cleveland Browns, and he only gets on the field half the games. Geno Smith? Really? And for the love of all things holy, Russell Wilson? The guy that the Denver Broncos are actively paying to not play for them. All of a sudden, he's better than the guy that everyone counted out and only managed to win the division, to win a playoff game, and put up career numbers last year. Wilson hasn't been to the playoffs since 2020 and hasn't gotten out of the first round since 2019. Baker Mayfield has 2 playoff wins with 2 different teams since Wilson's last postseason win. But hey, you do you, CBS. Go ahead, count him out again. Put a chip on his shoulder again. Watch him prove you wrong again. Because I would be willing to bet that Baker Mayfield will finish with a better season than at least 5 of the quarterbacks power ranked ahead of him, maybe even more. Either way, he'll end up in the top 15 where I believe he should be. And the Bucs and Baker Mayfield are at their best when they're being counted out and no one thinks that they can succeed. Career high in yards and touchdowns incoming for Baker Mayfield this season. Going to jump into the chat one more time before we get out of here. Bat W says, disrespect, it happens every year. Yes, it does. And I don't get it. Whether it's Baker or Mike Evans or Levante David or Antoine Winfield Jr., whoever it is, consistently, the Bucs are the forgotten team, the forgotten players, the discounted players, the team that everyone just kind of forgets they're there, except for the 3 years that Brady was in town. Nobody thinks twice about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which is what makes it so hilarious when they go out there and they prove everybody wrong. G Vegas says people won't learn or put respect until more championships are produced. Cowboys still writing the PR of the 90s. See, and that's where I'm going to disagree with you, G Vegas. The championships shouldn't have to come for players to get their due or for teams to get their due. Every year we talk about the Packers. Every year we talk about the Cowboys. Every year it's the same thing. The Packers haven't won a Super Bowl in over a decade. For as much as everyone loves Aaron Rodgers, he's only been to one. The Cowboys haven't legitimately been relevant since I was in elementary school. But again, everyone continues to talk about how great they are or how great they can be or the expectations. You don't even have to look at the Packers or Cowboys, because I get it. Those are massive fan bases, and the media and the talking heads are going to cater to those fan bases because of the viewership and the reaction that they're going to get. Look at the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears were consistently talked about as, off-season darlings for the last 2 years. People saying Justin Fields was a better quarterback than Baker Mayfield. The Bears were going to do better than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and it's happening again. Caleb Williams hasn't taken a snap in the NFL, and already the Bears are in the there was a power ranking of the top 10 teams in the NFC, and the Bears were like 9th. The Bucs weren't on the list. Like, it's silly and it's ridiculous, but I'm going to talk about it because I'm going to be the voice that says that it's silly and it's ridiculous, and these people need to wake up and give some of the respect that has been earned. Not that I think they just deserve because they play for the team that I cover, but because it's been earned by these guys, especially players like Mike Evans and Levante David, who are consistently overlooked, consistently ignored, consistently afterthoughts when they've done nothing but produce at the highest level each and every year that they've been in the National Football League. It's ridiculous at this point. Let's see. We got Heath in the chat saying Bucs are better this year, but the schedule is tough. Bucs 10-7 based on the tough schedule. I'm inclined to agree. I think that they're probably going to hover right around 10 wins. Again, we're going to see how that schedule looks when it comes out. And then, of course, we can talk about how good these teams are in May, but the way they look in May is going to be really different from how they look by the time the Buccaneers will face them. You're going to be dealing with injuries. You could have moves that are made. These things are still fluid. So on paper, it looks difficult, but it could end up being, not as bad as we think it is. But that is going to do it for my time on this episode. Again, make sure you are coming back tomorrow for a very special guest. Hopefully everything continues to line up. As of right now, things are in good shape there. Check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Become a Locked On Bucs insider by going to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs. Follow on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at Yarcho_Bucs, and make sure you are subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.